Talking about horses, bringing you closer to some of the best horsemen in the world for tips, insights, and stories. Listen at home, at work, in the car, or in the saddle. This is Talking About Horses. Here's your host, Patrick King.
Hey there, gang. Patrick King here, and I want to thank you for tuning in for now episode number 56 of Talking About Horses. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by Bettina Drummond. Bettina is highly regarded in both the United States and Europe as a trainer and teacher in the French classical system of riding. In 2018, she was named Honorary Écouier of Saumur with the Cadre Noir at the French National School of Equitation in Saumur, France, making her one of only two Americans and one of only two women to receive the honor. Bettina spent 17 years in training with Master Nuno Oliveira, beginning at age 7. She earned the coveted spurs awarded to instructors at 17 and was recognized as a master trainer at 21. She was also influenced and coached by some of Europe's finest trainers. I feel like we could go on and on with this, but Bettina, thank you so much for joining us here for an episode of Talking About Horses.
My pleasure. It's always a topic that is endlessly fascinating.
Isn't it?
Thank you for inviting me on this.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. So for folks that don't know who you are, can you give us a little introduction? Who is Bettina?
As a horsewoman, or just generally?
Oh boy, how about both?
Both? How long is your podcast? I'll condense it. I am born of American mother, but raised in Europe. And I started riding in America at age 3 in South Carolina on South Carolina Marsh Tackies with a Western trainer, shooting ponies. So I got my formation really just bouncing through the underbrush and dodging through trees. And we were taught very early the respect of the horse and the gun. And then during that period, we were living in France. My mother remarried a Frenchman, and I was exposed to French culture. And also my first meeting with Mr. Oliveira was age 6. He came to have dinner in France. And then at age 7, we trekked to Portugal because my mother was rather fascinated by this method of training. And she had been a hunter rider that was trained by Victor Hugo Vidal. So there was a lot of Frenchisms there already. Mm-hmm. And so I basically started going with her on these riding trips. My sister was the rider. I was the extra insurance as a rider, so to speak. And I got to bomb around outside on the vaulting horse. I got my first lesson with Juan Oliveira. And then my siblings went back to America, and I stayed on in Portugal, had a much more serious formation then, and then went and finished up high school in America and then university. And during that time period, I started training professionally and went to Mr. Oliveira and said, "Do you think I could do this?" And he said, "Oh, so-and-so came in and said you did a good job." But he was not very enthused about it. He was like, you should find a beautiful man, have beautiful children, and a beautiful life, and ride beautiful horses beautifully. So that was a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. So on the other side of the Atlantic, I put myself through university by rehabbing show jumpers at Oxford Hunt Club and hunters. And I really enjoyed that. And after that, I started going down to Florida with horses. I was sort of the repair shop for people going to Wellington. And I had my own horses in Palm City, and I did that for 7 years. And that's when I became a teacher. And during that period, my back had blown out, and I was doing a lot of rehab. And it sort of opened my eyes in a different way. And I really enjoyed learning how to rehab humans and horses simultaneously. As frustrating as it was in the first instance, it became really a fun adaptation to what I'd been taught in Europe. So I started feeling much more in my teacher modality, and during that time, I had the chance to apprentice with a few teachers in different walks of life, and I felt seen one of the great artists like Miss Oliveira, who happened to use horses as a medium. And that became an ambition of mine. But I had promised my mother and Mr. Oliveira that I would ride Lusitanos beautifully, trained and ridden with a certain expression. So I had to do that first, and which I did, and to at least my satisfaction. And then I got slowly into the performance art world with other artists, and that's where I ended up. So that's just a general overview.
The general overview. Okay, great. That's a lot. There's quite a bit in there. So I'm curious, you mentioned being the repair shop and rehabbing horses. Talk to me about that. What all did that involve? What were we working with there?
Well, the show jumpers it was fairly simple. It was recovering the fatigue before they would go down on the next set. At that time, they didn't have such a big treadmill. They had rest periods between going down south and then coming back up north. So a lot of it was recalibrating balance. If there'd been a stress on a leg, minor or major, I would use what I knew, having worked as Mr. Oliveira's demo rider in Europe. I was the designated interceptor for Oliveira with his clients' horses. So if the horse was having trouble in the clinic or physically, he would put me on and he could explain to me afterwards why we did certain things. So I applied that to the rehab work with the show jumpers. And then I was invited when really my whole career crashed and burned at 24, because my back blew out 3 discs in a row. I was almost fully paralyzed in my left leg and left arm. And not a single student of Oliveira's or nor show client wanted to touch me, because if you couldn't ride and exemplify the riding, that was it. So it taught me a rather punishing lesson. And one of Oliveira's first students, the person who built the first indoor ring for him after my mother built Potomac, was in Florida, and she asked me to come down and teach her. And I said, I can't ride. I can't ride uphill. I can't do this anymore. And she just smiled and she said, you know, honey, you've forgotten more than I'll ever know. So she had a whole slew of rescue horses and myriad of oddly bred Arabs, which that in itself was a whole learning curve for me and quite fun. They're smart little dinglings. But I went down that season and really just dug in there and said, how can I help these people and these horses? And I found that separately was fairly easy. It's when you start connecting the two, and if there is a mental and a physical issue on both sides, that was very challenging. So
on both sides, as far as the horses and the people?
Yes.
Okay.
It's much, it's an easier gig if someone has a mental issue with a horse that is reacting with a physical issue. But when they both have double trigger points, that's a little trickier. And so I specialized in that, and also I had an affinity for hot stallions particularly. So the vets knew it, and whenever there was a difficult horse that was acting very, very aggressively or in a way that was inappropriate, they'd tell the client to call me up. So I literally paid for my horses, during the season by doing those types of jobs. I did a lot of research on swimming, on interval training. I did, for that, I took a job with a friend who was a student of Oliveira's when I was 17 up in Glastonbury, breezing out racehorses, because I'd done that in Europe, and I'd also done polo ponies and taught them how to dodge when I was 7 or 8. One of my first teachers was a very good polo player, and it was a huge asset to have been, put so young on dodging horses. I actually don't think Oliveira and his son would have given me the time of day as a girl child if I hadn't had that ability and very long arms and legs. I think that would have sidelined me if I didn't have that. So I was fascinated by the balance of the rider's seat and how that could offset some of the rein lamenesses and also the joint insufficiencies that I was seeing a lot in the American horses. So I gradually expanded that when I came back up north with show horses, because I was starting to get results and people were creeping in, and very, very comfortably creeping in, because I never said, "Oh, do please tell people that I did the work." I was like, no. It's like you remember the Unknown comic, the guy with his paper bag over his head? I was the unknown trainer, fixer upper. I would just go and I would be the 2 months before the show stresses and then the recovery afterwards. So it worked out very well. I got a lot of experience with that. And then I was fascinated by the different breed reactions and the breed standards, because I've always been interested in the how far to go with training without denting the instinct of horses that are bred for a specific purpose. I think working with few bullfight horses at Oliveira's was very interesting with that. So that's in a nutshell. That's where I went. I applied Oliveira's ground techniques, the long lining techniques in particular, and also the boucher at the halt, recalibrating the horse's balance and offsetting the imbalances. I didn't do an awful lot of the aggressive flexion work, mostly because the American establishment in the 80s and the 90s was in a very different balance in the hand and leg, and so it was inappropriate to use that. It would have created too much stress. And I was very aware, because I'd worked my thoroughbred Fidelio, and he was the one that I completely worked in through Boucher. And when I presented in my last clinic with Oliveira, I said, well, I went too far with this and I found this and that. And he laughed and he said, you have to wreck at least 3 horses and fix them to begin to understand Boucher. So I felt better.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And what's can you dive a little bit deeper into that? I feel like we hear a lot of people talk about Boucher and Guernier, and what I've always found interesting in the lessons that I've had with you and other lessons that I've seen and heard you teach is how you can break down, this beginning was Boucher, this piece was Guernier, this was, the deeper understanding of each piece of those puzzles. Can you kind of break those down for us a little bit?
Well, to put a parallel in the Western world, you have the Vaquero training, and then you have the lineage that came down through the Dorrance brothers that had Boucher's influence in it. And the Vaquero training is about dominating the top line, and it has a lot of capstan work and head work, right? Mm-hmm. And it's about making the horse agile and building power. The Boucher work for the Western horse is about making the horse flexible and individual leg control and using flexion work to curb the horse without using a curb. So when I worked with Oliveira, he had in his mid 40s to late 50s, in that period, he had turned away from Boucher Première Manière, grafted on classical form, and he had made a sort of ambulatory mobile chiropractic release through using Boucher Deuxième Manière, the hands without legs, legs without hands, over the balance and control of the top line. So in effect, he used the leg and spur technique to lift the horse through his middle, and then he released both ends. He did the Boucher descendement complète, so that they acted as a double vent to the power. And it gave that incredible freedom where the horse really tuned in to that center point underneath the seat bones and the slight rotation of the upper body. And you would see Oliveira's torso move a little bit in a circular fashion and then leap forward or come back on diagonal pattern. And so all those, it made me see riding as three-dimensional. So that insertion of Baucher deuxième manière allows you to place in motion a recalibration, just like a half halt is a moment of suspension within the suspension of the horse's gait. And it's the moment where you can redirect a loss of contact, a loss of engagement.
Okay.
Well, if you add the Baucher deuxième manière and you render the horse very sensitive to those patterns, diagonal, lateral, and back to front, you have a sort of an effect like surround seat, like surround sound. When you listen, it's like surround seat.
Okay.
And it allows you to put, to bracket the horse with very little adjustment. It's really what creates lightness throughout all parts of the horse's body. And a lot of people fixate on the loop in the rein and the exaggeration of the horse going behind the contact and then being repressed by the spur work. But I was fascinated by the fact that you could thread the horse's energy and you could bleed certain aspects off in very small ways. And you didn't need the spurs. You could just do a brush of the leg. And that's what I've learned on Oliveira's personal horses. So not that he ever explained it to me. It was just something that you either felt or you didn't. And it was a bit like a video game. You know, you either got to where you could get the magic axe and go to the next level, otherwise game over, you know. So it to me, that allowed me to track. I went back and then I could quiz Oliveira and say, here in this form, when you do this and we redirect there, is that this part of this book or this chapter, whether it was Steinbeck on the shoulders or whatever? And then he would say yes, or of course, and blink rather puzzled, like, why didn't you know that? So he had a tremendous knowledge of that, but he didn't share it very often. And he wasn't a teacher for people who are very Cartesian in their brain. You know, you had to be able to free yourself up to feel, and then each technique, and then you had to thread that, and then you had to rationalize from the feedback in the horse. And you know, it's that marvelous moment where you hit the true note in the horse. You know, with Oliveira's training, it never played false. You were like, there it is. That's the sweet spot. That's it. But you had to then thread what part triggered that. And I found that very helpful in my rehab work, because then I could take the student and say, like you felt, take this part, and this part is supposed to do X, Y, and Z for the horse biomechanically or in its balance. Add a touch of this, a pinch of that, and there you have your recipe. It puts the flavor into it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the best way I can describe it. And it was very intangible. You know, it's like holding a butterfly. If you hold it too hard, it dies. So many of Oliveira's top students, the Portuguese, and I remember Ataíde at his funeral saying to me, we went wrong. We didn't understand this. You have to know those techniques inside out, and then you have to compose, and then you have to go back to the teacher and ask the right question. There's the Zen master, you know. Luckily, I come from a family where you're not encouraged to open your mouth unless you have something intelligent and original to say. So I didn't annoy Oliveira enough to not get to ask the right question at the right time.
Perfect. Good. What was it like learning from Nuno?
hard for me to answer that. I tried to do it honestly. I'm not trying to dodge it, but I was a child, so I imprinted a lot of the learning, like a full imprint behavior. So I didn't set out to learn from him, I guess is the best way of saying that, until much later, when I was very specifically told, you must learn this because I need you to demonstrate this. And that was incredibly easy, and it was challenging, but it was incredibly easy because Oliveira taught you so well within the horse. If you trusted the horse, and the horses had layers, depths of knowledge that made their brains very unequine like, and not a shred of fear. So when you went in to perform and demonstrate, you absolutely knew where you were, what you were supposed to do, and you could do it. So it was very empowering to learn at that stage. As a child, it was at times very scary. He wasn't very in control of his temper at the time. And I found out later he had blood pressure issues. So once he got on the medication, things got significantly better. But he was incredibly demanding of particularly the people that he formed young, on physical reaction, reflex, matching the horse. If you couldn't match the horse, you shouldn't be up there. And no explanation as to what you should do. Just, if you aren't on the right place, you just get yelled at that you're in the wrong place. And that was very hard because I came from a background of educated people who really were very sensitive to the end result, but very sensitive in wanting you to hear and learn. So it was a little bit shocking to me as a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old to be with this tsunami of a human being. And he was so operatic and so over the top that I was also like, excuse me, I come from an aristocratic background and I'm half British. What is all this? What is all this out here? But it was fun too, because I'm a daring doer. I like living a little bit on the edge of the razor blade of life. So he made it fun. And he was very fun there with children. If you said, can I take this for a spin? He'd say, go ahead, try it, see what happens. And then laugh when it blew up in your face, It was very intolerant with physical fear and weakness, very intolerant. When I broke my back as a child, when one of the horses threw me into the cement wall, I had to get right back on. And no question of going into hospital or anything like that, which horrified his working pupil at the time. Yeah. But it was, you finished the job, and it was done out of respect for the horse, and it was done out of speeding you up. And his horses were so strong and centered and sensitive that I didn't realize at the time that he was grooming me to help out with there. And so I understood much later on why it was necessary. Juan was a better teacher then. Juan was great. Juan would answer questions, and he'd come and grab my leg in the back of the lesson and he'd say, Bettina, and he's running along. He's like, the leg, the cuff, here, and now. And he would give me the timing, and he was like a big brother to me that way. And he was the one that suggested that I might be useful for the young horses. So, because he was fed up with rocketing around, with Mr. Oliveira with the lunge whip and holding the capstan on the young horses. So, but you felt safe as a house with João behind with the lunge whip and Oliveira on the capstan, safe as a house. And we had horses come in off of the fields, never having had a halter, and within 2 days I was on their backs, age 8. And they did crazy stuff. All of a sudden, the horse would just fold up in the middle of a canter and throw himself on the floor like a camel, or throw himself into the wall on your leg. And I remember very seriously as an 8-year-old child, after the leg impactor had been dealt with, and I went through breeches and skin like nobody's business. And I remember limping over to Mr. Oliveira and saying, why does the horse do this? They don't seem to be like that naturally. Why are they like that? It just seems silly. It is not right. And so he took my head like this, and he said, "Bettina," he patted it. He said, "Finally, all horses have psychopathic moments," and then smoked a cigarette. So he was really fun about stuff like, and I was like, okay, I accept that. I get that. So there's a little bit of a tendency that I see at Facebook of making him into the sort of Father Christmas of horses. All I can tell you, I remember telling Mr. Pirelli that when he asked me if the horses loved Oliveira, children and horses trusted him because he knew what he was about. And he had that tremendous energy in his lower back and tremendous conviction. I mean, if he told me that cutting my head off and cutting the horse's head off would make it right, I'd have done it immediately. That made you feel you were in the right place for the right person. That was the mastery. But he was absolutely intolerant of horses going askew and people going backing off. You had to overwhelm the horse. And I remember seeing Ray Hunt work horses on the ground and drive them. And it was very much that same thing. You overwhelmed the bad pattern. And it's all high school riders are like that. Phyllis was like that, Boucher, Oliveira. You overwhelm the horse, and when the horse is receptive, then you put the pattern that you need and want in it. And that's why Boucher is controversial with the German and French cavalry officers, because Boucher is about eradicating any natural instinct in the horse, making it unnecessary for the horse to go there, and replacing that with acquired reflexes, which is useful to the rider. So, the horses, when they were brought in, sometimes the things went very quickly, and within 2 weeks you were counter-countering a horse that knew nothing of humans and halters and things like that. And you were figure of eighting and beginning your shoulder ins and whatever, and the horse was framing more and more with the work in hand. And I thought it was a given. And then I came to America and rode a really badly trained warm blood and said, "Oh, I get it now."
Yeah, well, because it was just part of life, right? While you were there, it was.
Well, and it was so, Oliveira would adapt his technique to the horse's stress level, but he would adapt the horse to the purpose at hand, which lightness is not a light purpose, and balance is not a light purpose. And so there was no question of the horse running around playing in the pastures. I remember asking him about that when I saw that in France and then in America. And he said, "Why would you take a horse that is learning to collect and rounding up and learning to try and hear riders about collection, which is not endemic to horses, even if they're talented? Why would you then put them outside so that they can roughhouse and run past their buddies and run past the hand and run past the leg? Why would you do that?" So it was very didactic. The horses were kept in. They were kept very La Guérinière. La Guérinière was like that. The horses were tied up till they were 7, and they kept between the capstan and the whip and 2 people, and then they were ridden, and then they went to battle. And so the tradition was also very severe, because if you went to the airs above the ground, you had to know how to unleash that and how to contain it, because we did it in open saddle, not a special one. And you were responsible for, if someone's child was to your left on landing, you had to be able to guarantee that you could control the horse. So, it has its roots in that battle tradition, don't forget. So, you don't unleash the power unless you know how to curb it and contain it. And I think that was something that he was very strict about, particularly with some of the stallions that came in that were very difficult, and actually a few of them actively dangerous.
Wow, that's super interesting. And so I feel like I've got like 20 questions that could spur off from that. So then how did you adapt then, coming to the warm bloods coming back to America, and that just being such a completely different environment?
Well, Oliveira came up with that notion when I was 16. I'd followed him to his clinics in France. Jean was off on his own career, and so it left a gap. And I had to ride a couple of warm bloods in his clinics for the riders, and I did well enough with one that he thought, oh, this is good, because when I go to America, I want to do more clinics, and I want you to teach what I teach you with these horses to the clients in between the clinics, so that the horses progress better. And I think he was very aware when he taught in America the first few times about, at the time, how little classical form had been taught. From the 50s to the 70s, early 80s, there were so many colonels and majors and captains from different backgrounds that just did soundbite clinics. There wasn't a huge platform for a unified dressage. And he found that very exciting on one hand, teaching in America, but he found it very frustrating because in Europe, the average amateur knows enough to, between clinics, start scratching at different bits of information. And, the French expression is you start scratching the horse and things come out. And that didn't happen in America. So he wanted me to go back because he knew I was going back to university, and to do the demos and to do that. I wasn't that keen on it. So it really was being helpful in between clinics to the clients and watching their level of excitement of then going back and being able to do the next level up that made it really interesting, particularly the warm bloods, because I can't say that I fell in love with them at the time. It was giant Holsteiners and rather clunky Hanoverians and rearing Tricaners. I did well with the rearing Tricaners, but they didn't like American hands. So since I loved to go up in the air and I was good with the curb, I had a good feel. And the curb, I got the rearing Tricaners out of rearing. And it was a great career for that. And occasionally, because a lot of the clients were judges, they would say, why do you do that? And how did you do that? And I started explaining myself. And that was very helpful, because I remember the first time when the person said, well, how do you half halt? I said, well, and I explained what I did. She said, oh, you don't half halt on a rein and you're inside rein going up and back? And I'm like, what? It's like,
sure.
what? It never even occurred to me. Here I was 18. I'm like blinking at this person, like, what planet are you coming off of? So those conversations were very useful. And on the other side of the Atlantic, I got clutched at that year when I was 18 by two top-notch riders that were just the epitome of Italian and French riding to me. One was a show jumper and was the head of Saumur, and the other one was an Italian gentleman who was their gold medal in Tokyo in eventing. And I mean, when I say clutched at, I literally was grabbed by the back of my jacket by Colonel Angioni as I came off of a horse. And he said, come with me. And he pulled me into Oliveira's office and he said, you see all these books? Now, I've read them all. And I have ridden in the Olympics and I practice Boucher and I can barely ride my way out of Oliveira's lesser school horses and young horses. And I don't understand what he does and how. And then you get on and you do it, and I don't understand how you do it. And you can't tell me. So I can't ask him to do that, but I can ask you to do that. So you do it. And I was like, it was a little bit like, whoa, the guy's a bit on the edge.
Yeah.
It's an Olympian. I'd better do the job before he has a mental breakdown. So that was my first one. And then when I went to Saumur, I had the same.
Uh-oh, it looks like we've lost Bettina. Oh no. We'll see if she beeps back in here. Oh, here we go. All right, good.
You're back.
There we go. I'm not sure what happened there.
I live in a weird fluctuating cell zone, even with the booster, so it's probably in my end.
Okay.
It's probably Oliveira's ghost laughing at me.
There we go. There we go. He's joined us.
He does check in weird ways.
There we go.
So the end of my story is that the colonel in charge of Saumur at the time, and I'd done Oliveira was demoing there too, invited me out to dinner, and he was like, "But you have to explain to me how he does that." And he was mystified. He said, "How does someone who is as careless and graceless on the ground ride with such tact and lightness? How is it possible? And you need to explain to me how his flying change technique is." And again, he was kind of clutching at my sleeve across the table. And I was like, okay, all right, another Latin male that needs to understand how this is happening. So I read the books, and I could give the answers. And that helped me a lot in my American career.
Oh, wow.
That's the story.
Wow. So it was out of his desperation for understanding what was going on, huh?
Yeah, and it was it also made me realize how special Oliveira's amalgam, his blend of Boucher, Deuxième Manière, and La Guerinière was, and his riding at that level, because I saw him do some amazing things at Saumur. I mean, it was just unbelievable, and it was good to be a sidekick, you know. I remember one time he was putting a horse that Valentin D'Oresco had not been able to piaffe, and he literally did 2 flexions and the horse piaffed. It's a horse that had a tremendously large tongue and was Anglo-Arab. And I was passaging a mare that had been given to me and with instructions to ride it lightly, and it weighed a ton. So I'd fiddled around and I'd gotten it, and we were both in Descendemain crossing with this amazing light. And, you know, it's the indoor ring where Boucher argued with the Comte d'Or. I mean, you're like, wow. And at that moment, Oliveira looked up he was looking at his hands, he looked up and he saw me go by on that horse in Descendemain, and he gave me this huge shark grin. And I was like, oh yeah, this is good. And at that moment, I wanted to be able to explain to these people what he did, because it was so special.
Yeah.
And if I could do it in my lowly status on their horse, it emphasized that there was a method. It wasn't just Oliveira's genius, right?
Oh,
so
sure. It wasn't magic.
I could go, yeah, holy collection, Batman. I was a good Robin.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. So the lightness that you come about there, like you were talking about the horse that you were riding in that moment. Mm-hmm. We see so many horses that are heavy on the aids, heavy in the aids, and you're talking about this kind of razor edge, right, seat, the surround seat, and finding mm-hmm. this lightness. So how do we help one to find that when they've become accustomed to the heaviness that, I mean, I'm going to say that we can mm-hmm. assume it's coming from the riders that are maybe just unaware and creating that or promoting that in the horse. How do we reverse that?
Well, there's 2 types of heaviness there. There is the one that just comes from the fact that the riders have been formed to believe that you balance the horse to lean in the hand and be driven by the leg. And that is okay. A lot the German and French cavalry tradition. That's easier to deal with because they do put the horse in a good balance, and the horses biomechanically are well exercised. So it's very easy to use the lateral concepts of Boucher Deuxième Manière at the hold to literally stand off the horse of being a little bit over the chest and just balance the haunches a little bit more underneath. And very easy at that moment to move the horse and to unwind the rust, so to speak. It's sort of like taking a bolt and then putting WD-40 and then moving very small until it loosens itself up. And you can do that while you're doing myriads of circles at the walk trot canter. You can be acting like this. That's why the chiropractic in motion of that is so effective. The second is just horses that have been ridden too long in this aspect and buried a little bit and overdeveloped in gaits, underdeveloped in balance. That's trickier. You need the La Guérinière square exercises. You need to rebalance the seat of the rider with the legs primarily. Usually it's a lack of education in legs. We talked about this when you were here, that collection comes from the leg. And it's the lack of education that shortening the neck and pulling the base up gets you a certain form of impulsion and reactivity in the beginning, but it will slowly bite you in the behind as you go along the training plateaus. So it's redirecting the fact that you don't start with that. You don't do, whether it's sort of what I call bad reverse boucher, front to back boucher,
Okay.
or that you take the very cresty, swanny competition neck, which blocks a bit the back from functioning, and then you make the legs swim up. It's to know that those are exaggerations and that the people are not necessarily evil doing them, but that they need to be brought back to the active neutral point of a dynamic shoulder fore, a rounding up over the bit, and then a hesitation to go forward, which brings the horse back into a fluid half halt in its haunches. And to bring back that sense of basculing between the aids is not very difficult because you can do it within all the training patterns of third level-ish movements. So if you've got a competition obsessed person that's like, well, I want to do it lighter, but I don't want to lose my forward impulsion, or I don't want to lose, whatever the rationale is. You can insinuate certain feels and stand the curb branch in front, literally, of the head, the vertical head of the horse, and then you can teach the person to act underneath that or up to it. And I think that's the best way of coming about it, because if you start doing polemics of types of training, you don't have a dialogue. You just have you have no bridge. So I go at it as in, I'm here to troubleshoot. I'm a consult. From my perspective, here's what's missing. If you add this, then your half pass, you think about how the outside shoulder comes over the inside hind, and then at the moment afterwards, how the outside hip connects underneath the front curb. Then the half pass is useful to your passage circle or your passage to Piaffe serpentine. So it's by making those connections for the show riders that I also realized that it's not endemic to any race or breed or one method to look for lightness. It's really endemic in your attention. I think Oliveira was a rare bird because from start to finish in the break-in, his attention was lightness. Lightness, the horse responding quickly and easily in all parts. But for him, lightness wasn't a loop in the rain and piaffing 20 minutes on the spot. That was an aspect of it. But it was being able to move the horse constantly away from a lean. Any lean. Lean on your aids, lean on the side, lean into a lateral position, lean. To the point where
and obsessive about self-carriage, kind of physically and mentally, yeah?
You have to be, because how do you get a horse piaffing and going into airs above the ground effortlessly if you don't have that? He was very respectful of the effort that lightness took. He never would have asked a horse to do it in a stupid way. Occasionally he went over the top to the gallery, but it was with a very well prepared horse. Physically, he never prepared the horses like ahead of schedule, but the horses had the months and years of knowledge and had the awareness of where this was going to. They were never surprised or horrified, or if the horses went out too far, he could catch them and bring them back before they even landed into the stride. That's the speed that you need to get ahead, for the travel lightness. He grafted it more underneath and then propulsed it. I tend to, it's more like skipping it ahead of the stride, because I came to America and I live in a country that's obsessed by gaits. So the descendement is easier to skip ahead of the effort for me. But those are things that each rider decides. The show riders that let their horses lean are doing that out of fear of loss of contact and being marked down with it, or fear of loss of propulsion. You take away those fears, they start riding better, and they recognize that lightness has a utility, that it's not romantic. It's not an extra frill. It's not the cherry on top. It's actually the meat and potatoes. It's what makes the horses look so good and act so eager. So that's what I enjoy about teaching.
Would you say that lightness that you're talking about there requires more of a cognitive understanding from the horse on what's being asked, where the heaviness, we can kind of push one around and they might not understand what they're doing, but we can put them in a place and we can pull them in a frame and we can kind of get a thing done, but maybe the horse doesn't actually understand what it's doing? Does that make even sense as a question?
I've seen, yes, I've seen cognitive confusion even worse on horses that have been retracted and innovated in the name of lightness. So it works both ways, be fair. Because if you've ever seen a crazy boucheriste with an inversion in the top line of the horse, and they can't stop the horse from doing things, it's like Pavlovian reflex.
Like just throwing out answers to try to find the right thing.
Yeah, it's no different than the show horse that gets anxious and starts spitting out one tempies when you're asking for something else. You know, it's all a panic attack because things aren't clear. The key is that the root of movement has to be in those balancing points, and the root of lightness is that the horse at all stages, no matter how it starts out in his training, has to be clear about that starting, whether you call it shoulder 4 in the modern era or slight shoulder in La Gainière. The horse has to start with that and has to finish with rounding up under the half hold. Those aspects can then be pushed sideways, up and down, out, and then back and in. But that clarity is what the horses understand. That is the cognitive link, much more than a feel from the rider's perspective. Now, how you develop that feel is your own affair. Sometimes you can put things a little bit under tension to see what comes out. And Oliveira loved doing that. And even if it's a bit premature, maybe I'll start with a little bit of this to make this other thing that's bogging down come lighter. That's experience. That's the métier, what they call the professionalism. But the confusion, the deadening of the horse is what you're talking about, the deadening of the horse. I find I started with the anxious, panic-stricken, tightened horse in the name of Boucher, and I found that incredibly distressing as a child, incredibly, because I didn't understand why the horse wasn't trusting to let down his guard. So contraction in the name of lightness to me is more of a fear. The deadening is sadder because the horses have learned, what is that horrible shrink term? Acquired helplessness.
Oh, yes.
Through repetition, right? I think it all depends to me if the person has gone out deliberately to use it or whether they've accidentally hit a stumbling block and the horse has just died beneath that. Most of the people that I teach, I'm glad to say, are not like that. And I've only had to fire myself and dismiss myself a few times as a professional where I've said, I'm sorry, I'm not the person for you. And why is that then invariably in America, you say, I'm not the person for you, here's a referral to someone else. They run after you like, no, I was just going to do it. Don't go because I know you have something important and special and I'll pay you lots of money. And you're like, no, I'm the wrong person at the wrong moment in your riding career. You're not going to hear this. And I think that's something the horse can't reserve the right to fire itself, basically. So that's where, if there's confusion, which we all do at all stages of training, we may create confusion and explosions at times. You have to be able to get back to that starting point. And you have to be able to start the next block of knowledge, the next complication, with the first few months with putting those safety margins in. And you have to be able to associate that feeling into the next level of self-carriage, of rounding up, of mise en main, of pole attitude. And you can't be
Looks like we may be struggling again with connection there. Oh, are you there?
We're back.
Oh, there we are. We're back. Good.
We're back. It's actually my nickname is Zorro because I do flyby sightings on horseback in the show world. So now you see me and now you don't.
There you go. There you go.
Where was I in that conversation?
You were talking about carrying those elemental trusting pieces forward into the work.
Right. And I think that is the mark of an écuyer as opposed to just a rider. And we are trained it's not just don't go further than what the horse is able. It's if you're going to push that envelope, know how much air to blow in it so that it has a stretch and then back off and then go back in and back off. And Oliveira was like a spelunker, you just listen. I'd watch him, and hence the head down. He would watch the action of his hands on the horse's neck, the carrying muscles, and he would feel in his back and watch the hindquarters, and then he would put a tonality and it would reverberate. And you could feel it reverberate if you were on the horse and he was provoking it. And you had to be able to wait till those reverberations stopped. And I think that's what a lot of people don't do. And I'm not talking about just show people of different disciplines. I'm talking about trainers. They don't understand how quivery that the neurological system is of the horse, and that emotionally the horse reacts with that. So if you're going to put the horse on a psychic high with 20 minutes of Piaffe Passage transitions, you also have to factor is, can you keep those reverberations clear? When I coached virtually at Saumur, I'm on the other side of the Atlantic, but I was 6 strides ahead of their feel. And when I coached in private, they recognized that I could feel the reverberations before they in the saddle could, and they're very well-trained riders. So that's something that you have to learn here. It's like feeling an instrument inside your core and that reverberation. And that's Oliveira's quintessential training of another écuyer was based around that. not around the cerebral part. And that's why he failed with a lot of very good riders, a lot of very good professionals, because he expected them to know this and to recognize that that really was the first duty. And for him, the other was just noise, complicated noise. But that's why he would look at you and say, but of course it was that book. How could you not recognize that immediately? So I think that's where lightness is a feel thing. It's not, yes, there's acquired knowledge from the rider and the horse, but it's the conjunction, the moment where it really pulls together is both of you have felt to go there and you trust one another there in that spot. There's the real trust. And I never mistrust my horses when they're at that level. But before, I tested a lot. I'm like, yeah, I'm already there. And then I like going crazy. So I'm like, I was the perfect rider for that of my generation because I could just drop everything and go crazy with it. I loved it. I was like, eyes bugging. My mother was so relieved when I did my first balotade and my eyes were glinting. She's like, here, take the horse. No, you have to train Bettina on this horse. She was so relieved. And, that's something that all the Écouiers I've ever met have been tremendously generous towards me of all walks because they recognized that I had that feel. And so they forgave that I was raised in not so linear a fashion. And when I would ask questions, they would answer them. They would invite me to ride horses. They would show me what they thought I wasn't paying attention to. And that's the great tradition. Forget all the Latin stuff of I ride better than you, my master's better than yours, my technique is the best, blah, blah, blah. They write a lot of that. But when you're one-on-one or when you're a young person formed in that school, they want to see you understand that. They want to see it go to the next generation. They want to see it go to the horse through you. They just are like, why do you have these two glaring gaps in your writing? That's what was said to me. I was like, well, I didn't know they were glaring gaps. I didn't even know their gaps were there. Excellent. Teach me.
Right. The openness for it. Sure.
Yeah. Of course, they all did it behind Oliveira's back because he was so possessive. He was like a total jealous woman. So there was absolutely no talking about this. So, but I'm very grateful for them recognizing that that was something special because it showed me with that caliber of rider and teacher, it showed me how rare it was to work with a master like Oliveira. I mean, I always knew it. I knew he was, over the charts and kind of mad with his genius. But it really placed it so that when I hit my best formative years with him, I could give him that part, artist to artist. And he was tremendously generous in saying, this is your talent and this is your expression. It's not the same as mine, but it's complementary. And he was very, very generous with that. He understood that. Yeah.
Wow. So kind of going into that, the artistry of it, you are involved in the performance art of horses, right? Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's not of horses, it's with horses.
With horses, yes.
Yeah, I chose to work with various artists. It really came about because I had a Japanese adopted aunt who was an unbelievable person. She'd been an opera singer, a concert pianist, harpist, and she picked up painting in her 60s and became one of the recognized naive painters. She was just one of those people that had the tremendous discipline to study and that tremendous feel, that vibration. And so she took an interest when my mother became ill. She took an interest in me and because she'd come to Portugal, she'd seen Oliver, and she was just amazed. Like when Tibaldi knelt on the floor of the indoor ring, she saw Oliveira ride. I mean, you know, when you see artists of that caliber and they're like, wow, because there's something intrinsic about the life force of the horse and this figure, the centaur, that hits people viscerally, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this art had seen that, and she respected that art form. And I loved the piano, so she'd invite me for the musical soirees. So I grew up around Yo-Yo Ma and Peter Serkin yelling at each other about interpretation, and then after they yelled, they'd play together, you know, and it was just an extraordinary moment. And my grandmother had a lot of literary people around her, including Lillian Hellman, who, thank God, liked me because she was very difficult. And I learned a lot listening to them and watching them interact and choose words, and I loved then going around with the horses and feeling my way around the music that I'd heard or the musical words. And I started writing tone poetry, because that when I studied at college, I had done my dissertation on symbolist poetry, and it was something that came together rather naturally. And then I started freestyling with the horses in my early 30s. I started turning on the music and wherever I went, and then whatever came out, came out. And that was really fun and challenging. And still to this day, how I ride, I like riding, you know, on the moment. The horse has to be completely with you for that to work. And you just have to feel your way through the layers of music. But those are the impromptu performances that I really enjoyed. And then with I had an impromptu experience with ABT dancers. I was at a cocktail party down the street from here in a very famous garden, and I'd been asked to bring Mimi, who was a dancer. She was just so unbelievably supple and very prima ballerina absoluta in her stance. And I started dancing, and then these people suddenly came across the lawn and in their jeans started dancing around and together. And it was just like a dance jam session. I didn't know who they were. They didn't know who the horse was. And it was the most beautiful performance. And then I did that with some musicians, again in this garden. And I was hooked. I was just hooked because and then the practices are so marvelous because you can listen in between the instruments and get to know them, like the Ethel Quartet I've worked with now for a couple of years. And this last performance last year, I was able to hear clearly their interplay and then place the horse's movement in between the musical phrases and play with the moments of each individual instrument. And it was just magical. It really was. It was one of the best rides. And the horse was young. It was his first time out. There were some things that were not accessible. You know, that's a command decision you have to make on the spot too. Is no, don't eat that now. It's too much for you.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And you just recently finished filming a music video, is that right? Or is that still in production?
Yes. No, it's now gone into rough cut, and then we have to do the fine cut edit over the winter. But yes, I started last year, and I wasn't sure if I was going to finish it, obviously, in my situation. But I'd kept back the third horse because he was very immature as a stallion, and I thought it was too soon for him. And he has a very solid, rocky feeling to him. I bred several horses and bought 2 others with a notion of a certain piece of music that has 3 solo instruments and an orchestra. And yeah, long story short, each horse has a different tonality which fits a different instrument. And so that's my final project. So this in-between project was getting each horse out. And I'm using the music from Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the Neil Diamond score. And I thought, I want to go into nature And I want to have this resonate in my head while the horse is resonating with the training. And I want to see if it comes out right.
Oh, wow.
So hence the pictures of Kimacho on top of the crazy high escarpment in Vermont. Yeah. I don't think I'd have done that with many horses. Let me tell you, I am Macho and Mimi, double thumbs up. Those guys were so brave.
Yeah.
So brave in my career.
Wow.
I once threw a dancer behind Mimi. I invented a cool maneuver, wasted it on a fundraiser for the World Cup or something equally stupid, but it was marvelous. I went towards her and I said, "Give me your arm," when I pushed out, and I walked in school walk, and I grabbed the dancer and I threw her behind me, rocking the mare back on the haunches, and she goes out in this perfect arabesque, and I canted off. The second time I did the maneuver, I wanted to put less power because I hurdled the poor woman so far. I thought she was going to break a leg. But Mimi, completely unhorse-like, leaned into both aspects of the maneuver the second time round. Now, most horses would be like, "Look, this human being just went past me," and then we rocketed forward after rocking back a little bit like this. Mimi, she was like, "I know this. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Get out of my way."
She understood the
you
choreography.
I do me.
Yeah. Wow.
And I have the fun at the end of that performance that of Dover's voice in the back going, "Well, that was blankety blank fabulous." So I knew I'd done something right.
Well, and that goes so much into what you were talking about really having everything available in the horse when you're doing those things, when you're
those relationships also take knowing the horse from A to Z and the horse knowing you. You have to disarm in the training. The horse has to know your weaknesses, and you have to assume the responsibility of the horse's weaknesses, and the horse has to want to give you that. So then you can glory in what you can do. Some horses are born performers. Those recognizing them is also part of the training. It's recognizing that the mind is not going to fry under pressure, and that the body is going to glory in it. And who wants to go in and see a timid horse overridden by a bullish rider? And when you're talking art,
right.
Elizabeth Stredd took one look at Mimi, and they were like divas together. They were like recognized artists. It didn't matter that one was an equine and that she didn't know anything about horses. She was just like, there it is. She's a prima ballerina absoluta.
Wow. Wow. So you talked about breeding horses for breeding them to fit instruments.
Well, that's a specific project. It's not fit instruments. I bred them hoping that there would be a tonality that would match the reverberation of instruments, a deeper tonality for the cello, higher tonality for the violin, and a clever tonality for the oboe. And that's a specific piece of music that since I was 7, I wanted to ride horses to. And I didn't even want to ride dressage then, but I had this vision. But I've bred a lot of horses in my life for learning my end, which is learning not to choke a certain movement or learning to milk a certain line while doing another thing with the legs of the horse. It's really like being a classically formed ballet dancer and having to learn jazz dancing, and that required a different transition for me because I was trained in equestrian art, and it doesn't get more didactic than that. And I was like the poster child for it. I had the body, I had the training, I had horses. Here I was, and it never really floated my skirts up. I was good at it. It was nice. Everybody was like, ooh, ah, and when I was about 18, I came away from Oliveira's, and I was like, I'm going to throw up if I do another line of one tempies to music. And whatever and not know how the horse feels about it, you know?
Oh,
So that's what made me look a little bit differently. And the flow. I'm a bit of a I have a jazzy feel to my technique, particularly my classical form, that I like it to not lose the purity of the form, but to be able to move the horses so that they look more like liquid underneath the skin. That was more of my ambition. I never wanted to be Mr. Oliveira or ride like him. I had clients that would say, I don't want to just know Oliveira, I want to be Oliveira. And I'm like, how could you be someone that is a master anyhow? And you know, people said, well, you don't ride like Oliveira. I'm like, look at my body. I'm a girl. I'm a long, thin girl. It's not going to look the same. I can do the same moves, but I have to find my own expression. And that's what I meant when Oliveira was very encouraging. When I rode my first horse that I bought from him over here, and then he saw what I did, I think he was very moved, very moved. And I like to tease him. I used to go and ride his horse Swan that he sold me for $1 because I didn't really like the horse, but he wanted me to have it. And he would say, well, do this and do that. And I would say, no, it's my horse. I want to do this music. He'd say, you're a terrible girl, but I like you. So, yeah, sometimes you also have to hold your own. It's the same thing as a horse that's dominant and trying to push through the age. Sometimes you have to hold your own. I don't think I would have gotten as far as I did as a student if I hadn't been able to say, no, I have a clear vision of where I need to be and what I'm trying to learn with this. Yeah. And I don't want to duplicate. I don't want to be a pale ghost of you or an imitator.
Right. Finding your own in there. Yeah.
And it was fun talking to him on that level. When we had tired from clinics and we had dinner, he really needed to rest his mind and be away from people's shoulder-in fixations or you know, piat needs. He just wanted to talk about things that he felt were very moving, and I always respected, even though it shocked me as a child, that he would be moved when things were beautiful to cry. As a big macho man, it was quite amazing to see that. Wow. And beautiful tears, you know, not ugly weeping. Just, you know, and then he'd need to hold your hand to know that you felt that moment. I mean,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He once asked me why I didn't cry a lot. I said, well, first of all, because you trained me, and to cry in front of you would be to be dismissed immediately. But I said, also, I come from a long line of people who weep internally at beauty, and we just sit mesmerized by it. I said, I'd rather be mesmerized by beauty, however it grabs you. And so again, that led to a conversation of, we felt the same way, but we reacted differently. And that taught me a lot about training horses too, that you could train the same exact techniques, but the horse is going to react differently. And that's got to be okay. Otherwise, you become didactic. I once told Gauthier Racinet, you know who Jean-Claude Racinet is?
Yes.
The Congoche. I once told Racinet that he was too German for me with the way he was didactic about Boucher. I thought he was going to hit me at first, and then he laughed and he said, I understand why you were saying that. And then he said, well, you're more Boucherist than I am. I said, no, I'm just further in the second mania. But it was the didactic way of, it has to be that or nothing else. And I reject that. I'm American. I live in America, and I have opportunities as an American woman rider because I want to see what other people are doing with it. I may not agree, or I may say, you're deluding yourself that that's the pure form, you know, but that's my job. If they're hiring me for it, I'm equally happy to zip it if nobody asks me. This is why I live alone. But it is amazing to me how many people in different walks of life in America are curious about lightness and this graft. And I find it so touching that on both sides of the Atlantic, over here you have true unity and you have horsemanship through feeling. And then you have Oliveira's reflections. And on both sides of the Atlantic, it was that magic graft of those techniques, those heritages. And the funny thing is, so many of the riders don't understand that that is a joint heritage and that it is a novelty to bring the two together.
Yeah.
It is not been seen before, but it truly is, I think, the chiropractic next level up. And I think dressage, in its definition, will not last in this century if it doesn't redefine around the horse's chiropractic well-being. I think that's a given. It will become a strange, exaggerated, like if you see someone do bad flamenco and it's all, So I think that I'm encouraged. The end of my life and career, I'm encouraged because I see those connections being made, and I see all you young trainers beginning to interact the way we used to at that higher echelon without the ego getting in the way. And, if someone, in my world, if someone had the body, the time, the time was right, and they had the horse, you were like, go in there, do it. Everybody was supportive because everybody benefited from that.
Right.
And if they saw that there were some failings, they would quietly help you clean it up, because it didn't help them if it wasn't, well received. So I think that you will find that I think America has a big, big place in this. I think you need to get over the American fascination with, I just want the buffet. I don't want a sit down meal. To grab bits and pieces and then kind of cobble them together and say it's a new technique. I've reinvented the wheel. And here's a orange plastic swizzle stick to do it with. And that'll be $15. We market too much, we just try to sell the idea too much. Let it cook. It's like the training plateaus. Go back to your shoulder in, let it cook, let it mature, and then have another dialogue with another teacher. Ride someone else's horse.
Yeah.
Make those opportunities through conversation.
Yeah.
And that is the great gift of Europe, I think, is that you have those conversations.
Well, yeah, the collaboration, the conversations, it's I've always felt that that's an important thing. We think about, it's a living art, right? So it only survives by the practitioners and what they're bringing to the table and sharing with each other and expanding it.
It's only just now becoming a living art. It was an obsolete art. It was an art based around military warfare, whether you do the 18th century hand-to-hand or you do the 19th century charge the guns. Your pick which type you want. But it was very stylized and standardized. And I think, there's a reason why the four big schools have to get together to sort of go, come on, everybody, clap to it.
Right.
And that they invited, people who do liberty acts or people who are musicians. They have to put something with it. So I think it's beginning to morph that way. They still define themselves by those regulations. There, you have to have the elegance, the straightness, the this, the that. Much like competition, because that's where competition took it from. The art form of we want to raise the bar and have lightness there. No one else has done that with Oliveira. That was his great genius and gift.
Yeah.
That is why you guys talk about lightness, because there was a guy called Nuno Oliveira. And wow, on his hill alone in Portugal, that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah. It's a tremendous influence, right? That he alone had, and yeah, like you said, yeah, everybody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, and everybody's making myths about it too, which I find vaguely amusing. He told me before he died, he said, "You watch, I will be." My earpod just went. I took my earpod down. Come on. Do I have you back?
Oh, yep, there we are.
There we go. I drained my earpod. I talk so much.
Oh my gosh.
I know, which is why I don't put both in. So yeah, I think that there it is. The notion of artistry and lightness in writing, because it comes from Oliveira, it shouldn't make so many myths about. You know, he is the Santa Claus of horses, and he was always kind to amateurs and professionals, and like, come on, you know, it's that I need to rewrite history to make it acceptable. No, I like the fact that he near terrified me as a child. I was like, crazy eyes. I used to call him Frog Face because his eyes would bulge when he was mad, and he would hang his flippers over the balcony and kind of flap, and then he would give up on the lesson, and he'd hang with his eyes. And I remember I went past him once and I said, "Mr. Oliveira, we're trying. It's all right." Oh. And he said, "Bettina, you're a very sweet child." I felt sad-looking frog.
Oh, there you are. We missed the last little bit right there.
I said I felt sorry for him as a child. He was a very sad frog.
A sad
people
frog.
Didn't get it. And a very angry frog if they really didn't get it.
Oh,
but he, you know, he cared. He cared enough to be passionate about it. And if you can't ride to opera the way he did an exhibition for Buffy Stevenson, Adlai Stevenson's sister, who was a friend of my mother's who came, that to this day, my hair stands on end thinking about it.
Wow.
He did it to Madame Butterfly's death scene.
Oh.
At the end, when the gong went off, he cantered in place, came round, piaffed the horse, dropped the rein, and did a balatade that I thought his head was going to hang on the speakers. I've never seen the horse jump like that. Landed cantering in place, and it's a very short arena if you've seen it. That's a very short width.
Yeah.
But usually I jumped about 5 to 6 feet. He must have jumped 8 feet in the air from a piaffe. And the horse was like that. He wasn't out of his gourd. He was on the edge of everything he had. The horse's legs were like this, and his brain was like that, and his ears. And Mr. Oliveira was there, and then ta 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 ta, boom, and off it went.
Wow.
And we were like dish rags. We were just like, it was what, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. We were just like eradicated.
Wow.
Wow. I'll never forget that. That's when I started really taking him seriously as an artist. I was like, he's not just a mountebank. Because sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, he's pouring it on for the gallery. Yeah, not interesting. Reading my book. And then a few things like that would come out. And I've told this story many times when I looked up at 12 and I saw the ray of light, and he did a descendement piaffe on Arpelo, bay horse. And I've got a beautiful picture of it. And it was so simple. And it was one action of one side of his back to one touch on the rein. And the horse was just completely entranced and subjugated at the same time, which is the best way to be in life. And my head snapped up, and I was like, "This is for real.
Wow.
You can't lie to the eyes of a child. That is genius right there.
Yeah.
Purity. It's that simplicity. It's incredibly complicated to get to, but it's incredibly simple and quiet and convincing. Permeability, not just for the horse. As a student, you have to be permeable to those sensations.
Yeah.
And then you can study the art with horses, because you have to be permeable to that.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
You have to be able to cry, even if it's internal.
Even if it's internal. There you go. You were starting to say before your ear pods went that Nuno mentioned something to you before he passed.
Oh yes. He said, "I will be when I die. You go see." He would say, "You go see when I die. 20 years later, I will be more famous and more well known than in my lifetime."
No kidding.
Prophetic.
Right. He called it.
He wasn't a high intellectual about a lot of topics, but he had a canniness, an earthiness and a canniness that he understood himself and his motivations very well. That's why he could take advantage of people. And when I said, "It's a bit shameful that you're doing that," he'd smile like a big shark and he'd say, "But I can, and I'm good at it." Peacock moment, peacock. And you had to love it. It was and I was good therapy for him, I think, because I'd be like, no, you can't do that. That's not allowed. You can't.
No, you'd call him out on it.
Can't do that. No, totally. And that was level 1. Level 3 was when I'd flag down the groom on the way down in the morning, and I'd give him a 10-page letter, and I'd arrive later, and Oliveira would come waltzing out, and he would fling the letter into the wastepaper bin, and he'd say, "Oh, well, it's good to talk about these things. Let's go ride." Meaning, I accept that you're angry and that was not a good moment, and I misbehaved, but I'm not going to say anything about it. So moving on. And I was perfectly okay as long as I said my piece and I got listened to in a certain way. It was quite all right.
There you go.
But again, it's like holding the line with a horse on the munch line. The horse doesn't pass the capsule, doesn't get behind the munch whip. And when he would berate me for it, I would say, "Well, you have only yourself to blame. You trained me."
That's great. That's
cheeky.
great.
I was very cheeky.
Oh, goodness. So with talking about the artistry and talking about the collaboration, the sharing, talk to me for a bit, if you would, about the APAHA program. I'd like to kind of put that out so folks know about that.
Well, that was something that I started informally 22 years ago. I helped a friend. Yeah, I helped a friend. Probably no more than that. But I helped a friend who was a professional who'd worked with Oliveira with 2 of her students, and so they'd come down here and they would work. And one of them was very poor and was obviously not going to get an advantage to ride horses. And I had a cheval de selle that I had trained up, because every 2 years, 2 or 3 years, I take a different breed and have all my life to learn how to adapt this technique so that I could dialogue better with people with different types of horses in the clinics and adapt it better. So she needed a trained horse to ride, and so he was sort of done with what I knew that he could do, and I gave her the horse, and I gave her the free access to bring the horse back, and then a young horse. And I did that with pretty much every young trainer. They had the capacity to come and ride a trained horse if they needed, or I could help spruce up their trained horse, and they could bring in a horse and start it from scratch and get some of the holes filled in on the break-in if they wanted to get to that idea, that perception of working towards boucher grafted over Lagania. And it didn't always go down the linear progression. Invariably, young trainers want to get places, or they want to study one aspect, and it's their right, as it's my right to say, if I were you, I wouldn't do it quite now. But
sure.
and I've had some come back later and restudy. And so I thought, well, why not make this a little more formal invitation? And so APAHA was created with that in mind. I bankrolled the whole thing myself the first a few years. And we did workshops where I would invite people from different walks of life and give them the opportunity and a horse to ride in front of them. Sort of the same sponsorship program that the young riders have. And I helped Lendon with her fundraiser with Mimi. I did all the pouncing about and gave them my DVDs to sell to raise money for those kids to be able to work with the various coaches. I thought, well, if I help them in their world, which doesn't actually interest me that much, why don't I start something for American trainers, professionals, that will not have the wherewithal all the time to go to Europe and ride a trained horse, or to people specifically interested in the path that I've taken, the studying with Oliveira. And so some people come in just for one visit, some people come back over and over again, and some people climb very slowly. And sometimes it's a 2 or 3 year process before they can get to the next idea. And that's what I'm here for, is to say it's perfectly okay that it takes X amount of time. It's supposed to take time. So it's an American disease that somehow magically you get a trained horse and magically somehow it enhances your riding, which it doesn't. Enhanced riding has to be practicing lots of little adjustments and gestures over and over again, and having the capacity to keep coming back to 2 or 3 different teachers and refine your ideas and then decide on the path. And then being brave enough to say, this is my path, this is my work, could you take a look at it? And that's a trust that Americans have a hard time, because they're used to constant barrage of criticism of you picked the wrong way of doing it, the wrong horse, the wrong this. If someone tells me I want to do what you learned from Oliveira, that's a totally different ballpark. You have to have very set criteria and set steps.
Okay.
Everybody can do a little bit of it with any horse at any stage of formation. But if you say to me, I want to ride in like this, in a double bridle, to music, and have classical form and do boucher at the same time, okay, you've got about 20 years of study, and no wimping out. Don't sit there and say, gee, it's hard. Gee, it's, and you may have to get other horses. So that's a long process. But the process of having an eye that it's benevolent in the sense it wants to help you, but it's not a slacker eye. It's not there to say, oh, that was pretty good. It's there to say, that was a good try. This is a good interpretation. That's not so good. Or this, if you're telling me this is what you want to get through, I'm missing this. My eye needs to see that, or I need to see this added to it. Like a master chef, I need to taste the cuisine, and I say, well, yeah, too bland, too much this or that, or interesting choice, new recipe, interesting choice. Not convinced that it's really the original recipe, but it's an interesting place to go. That's what I got in Europe from people. Nobody ever told me I was dead wrong, or that I look like hell on a horse. Nobody went that far. They just said, yeah, this is lovely, but I would like to see this more established or this more fluid. And I explain to me what you're trying to get to. Well, if in the definition in the book of that technique, this has to happen for it to be real. Can you add that? So challenges. And for Americans too, it's leave the baggage out of the ring. The first thing I learned from Oliveira is this is an indoor ring. We are of service to the horse. Whatever is in your emotional pattern, in your anxieties or whatever, it has no business here. And then he looked at me and he said, doubly so for you because you're a female. It's like no emotions, out of turn. Why? Because in order to be clear to the horse, you must train cold. It must not be based on emotion. Your emotions come to encourage the horse, to encourage the platform. But to create the platform, you must know what you're doing, and the horse must trust your integrity. You must have the integrity to hold yourself. Whatever is happening in your human life has nothing to do with the equine at that moment.
Right.
And you have to bring boldness to it. Because training is a creative act that way. You have to be bold. If you're going to add an ingredient, you have to add it. And you have to then not crank the heat nervously before it's cooked. So that's when experience and an outside eye can say, okay, I get where you're going, but you've missed this pit stop and you're jumping the gun with the heat. You're putting too much heat. And then it's a question of also some people want their tact, or if they're missing a little bit of one aid. So they just come and for 3 or 4 days, they work one aid, one idea.
Okay.
The funny thing for me is they always come in. I always say, I think I did that with you, make a list, make a wish list, make a realistic list, what you think you need to work on. Make a horse list, what movements you haven't been experienced or balanced, and then make a crazy ideal, this is where I want to be, and this is who I want to be in 4 or 5 years. But the first day is always, well, try to get to this point. There's A, there's B, there's C. Try to get there with tact and with unity between your aids, because that's what schoolmasters do for you. They don't just blindly piaffe or blindly do 15 tempies with their eyes shut in little rinky-dinky ways, right? It's more about teaching you where you are and where you hesitate. So that's what APA is about, is to, maybe it's because I'm a Trekkie, to boldly go where no woman has ever gone before. But it's true. There you go. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, I love it. And what is it that APAHA stands for?
Oh, Association for the Preservation of Horsemanship.
Association for the Preservation.
But it really was about horsemanship too. That because a lot of people want to get on the trained horse and think lightness, and don't take responsibility about the faults in their body, nor how they're talking, and nor how they're feeling, and how the horse is reading those. So that's really why it was named that. And it's the preservation of knowledge. Goes back to that first student, Sharon Campbell of Oliveira's, that was like, you've forgotten more than I'll ever know. Well, I don't want to forget it, and I want to give it to the next generation as much as I can. And I can't without the feel of it, because you can't just proselytize through the mediums or through paper. You have to show the little steps in between and the things that are grafted together. It's not just the written word. It's the gestural, as the French call it. It's the, for years, Oliveira never explained anything to me. He just showed me the gestures and would say, half halt, go, until I got the instinct and I could read it off of the horse. And that's where there's a kinship to the Western tradition, is that it's about an apprenticeship and about knowing when to shut up and just listen and watch and absorb.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is
So
definitely so missing. Yeah.
It's funny that, is it because we're a nation of business people and shopkeepers that we think that we're somehow exempt from that tradition? Because in the show world in Europe, you have that tradition, the working pupil and the show and tell, and it's a very deep relationship between master and student with that. And sometimes it has negative moments, and it's to teach you that there will be negative moments in your horse life with horses. You have to be able to withstand that. And the first lesson is with the teacher, the human being, that occasionally will stomp all over your finer feelings and, remove your ego or flatten it and roll it out like no. I don't know. I think that apprenticeship just ought to have a much greater part in education.
Yeah.
It used to happen much more naturally, I think, in the 1940s, 50s, because there weren't so many teachers, there weren't so many, it wasn't as easy to get around. I think the big, enormous distances in America make it a bit hard to have that. And I think that's why your generation is doing such a great job at linking up. You really are. Even if sometimes I'm a bit mystified at the wording, it's like you invent a speak about the whole training process, and I'm like, okay, then I have to sort of say, I have to quiz you and say, what does this mean? And that's the show and tell that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I need to learn from you, in your words, what this means, so then I can relate it to, it's this tool, and this is how you use it.
Right.
And so it's good for both sides. It keeps me current and able to dialogue, and it keeps the students also an accountability to the past history and methodology that they have to justify. And it's important also because if you don't have a big horse early on in your career and you haven't had the formation, sooner or later, someone from the show world or someone who's a rival clinician will turn around and say, and how many piafs have you done in this on demand? And how do you do that?
Right.
And, so we try and set up those lessons. It didn't catch on as much as I hoped it would, the financial sector, but it caught on visually. People loved to come and watch the workshop and love to see the reports. But it's made conversations from the people who study. I see it on Facebook. People who I taught 20 years ago are encountering people from now, your walk of life. And, it's a cozy thing to have left little footprints on your forehead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like you say, it keeps the conversation going, which is essential. It's the only way it carries forward, right?
Yeah, and it's already skipped teaching generations in Germany and France. It skips one or two more, it's gone, I don't know Portugal. It was my first time going to the school, but they preserve the Mayalva school. It's a different tradition. But that's why I made the effort. I was roundly criticized on both sides of the Atlantic. The Oliveira cartel in Europe criticized me for helping the show riders in America, and then they criticized me, and the Americans criticized me for helping Saumur. And I'm like, I'm a free agent.
Right.
Nobody gave me I had the start I had, and at 17 I had nothing left. I had no money, no opportunities, nothing. I just had the skills, And I put myself through college and life on those skills. Not many people know this. They just assumed that I had the wherewithal to do that. But I had made those connections, and I know how important they were. When after Oliveira died, the first person I rode with, just to go and show Mimi to him and say, "Am I still there?" was Patrick Le Roland. And it was, again, I cried internally because he was so generous, and he said it just is a delight to come and see you and see riding like this. And then he said two things that I could think about to sharpen up, and he said, "It's so wonderful that in this country that you walk through the door and it's a piece of what we've shared." Whether it was, and he loved Oliveira, and it was just a wonderful, warm feeling. And when I rode for one of the von Leindorf students, who was a very beautiful rider, it was the same thing. After 2 days, he looked at me and he was like, "Why are you here?" I said, "Because of your experience." And it matched a bit my experience. And when I got off, I limped on my left leg, he limped on the right leg, and we turned and looked at each other. And I said, "Too many hairs above the ground, too young." And he said, "Yes." Those things are priceless.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope for your generation. I hope that you can get that level of interaction. And also the people who have been through trauma and who love to heal horses. I've really enjoyed talking to you lot, that generation, because I was considered a bit of traitor to my class of riding in Europe, because I opted to stay in America, and I was fascinated by that aspect of adapting these methods to any horse, any rider of any level, and fixing all these issues. I was supposed to be the quintessential, child in the bubble. I was supposed to, stay there. I even had someone come up to me when I was about 42 and say, "Oh, well, how disappointing. You have wrinkles now." I was like, "Yeah, you knew me when I was 14. I'm now 42. It's like, what, you own me because you saw my body do certain things?" But that's how crazy people are in their visuals, and they own you if you're in a book. They own you if they saw you as a child and whatever.
Yeah.
And people are enthused because my body still looks on a horse in Piaf and Levant the way it used to. They're enthused. It reassures them. There's a continuity. And I'm like, if only you saw me when I got off the horse. But
right.
It makes me excited. It makes me excited to still be excited about not only riding it for me, but sharing it. And that's what you guys have to find. It's not just about healing broken horses and healing broken ways of thinking. So once it's healed, it's bringing out that inner glory. That's what lightness is too on horseback. It's bringing out what you know is inside. And I can sniff it. I see a horse at three hills over, and I'm like, that's the one I want, because I see what it's going to come out. And I want to see that. And when I see younger riders and professionals, I don't see their struggle. I see what they could be in that ideal shape, same as the horse. And I think that's important too, because you need to have that strength of character to step forth and shine. And, if you had met Oliveira, you would know immediately that was quintessential to the art. It's not just, like Daniel said it best, the horse must please himself in his air, not just the horse. The rider must also have a sense of ease and pride and enjoyment. And for that, you need sound mind, sound horse, sound body. And you need to heal yourself to that. And that's what horses are. Their molecules are strong. They're not these weak, broken things by nature. They move through air. They play games of chicken. They suddenly pounce on you, and then they go, "Ah, no, I didn't mean it." It's all the relationships that you'll come across. Your human relationships are there in a nutshell. But they do one thing: they quiet down, and then they hear. So you have to quiet down and listen, and that's ultimately the right half-hold.
Mm. Well, that's pretty powerful right there.
Zen frog.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a couple of my students would say, "Oh, Yoda's back."
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Tune in, you must.
Tune in, you must. There we are. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Well, this has been very delightful. I've gone completely over time, haven't I?
Oh, it's, I would say there's never a time limit for these things. I love it. But
well, I'm always
I want to
game
be respectful of your time as well.
Yeah. Do you have any other burning questions? Or I'm always willing to come back if you have another list.
Fantastic. Well, we will definitely do that. I do have a question. There's been a couple questions that have been submitted ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
All
right.
We'll maybe just touch on a couple of them, and maybe we will just have to have another chat for questions that I'm sure will come in additionally as a result of this conversation. We have one question. Says, I would love to hear Bettina's insights on something that came up this morning. We are ever increasing the prices on young horses sold to perform at the top of competition. In the jumper world, it's approaching racehorse prices. The most recent PSI auction sold 50 young horses for over $22 million. Top selling horse at 4 million euros was a 6-year-old mare. The training that goes into these young horses to get them to perform for these quick sales is unquestionably very hard on their minds and young bodies, putting many horse trainers in the fix of either keeping them patched up for their lives in the top of the performance world as we push medicine to help keep pushing horses to their limits, or we take the route of healer in rehabilitation. Where does the cure lie? What steps can we take to create a more holistic and long view of the horse? And what's the most effective way to use classical principles and teachings to renegotiate a relationship with horses in the performance world?
Okay, well, first of all, this is something that has come up periodically in my career, where I've spoken to both the auction riders and also the people who train the young horses for the sales, who the good people are horrified at the shortcuts that the not so good people take. Mm. And I think it's like everything else. There are good people, and you have to know, you have to go and look for them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the quantitative factor that's made the prices skyrocketed. It's this notion that, and I blame America for that. I really, really have the harshest condemnation for the American system, that we are not capable of producing our Grand Prix horses here, and that we have some really well-bred young horses, and we go constantly to Europe rather than riding better and producing better teachings, and that we have to go and get these incredibly expensive horses. Well, the problem is there are very few horses. They don't have to be expensive, but there are very few horses that have the capacity to move and balance and arch the neck in a certain way. And upper level dressage has gone into this uber breeding program for this uber exaggeration of riding. And they keep telling me it's so much better now. If it's that much better, why are the techniques becoming so astringent, is the best way of putting it, with young horses? Already in my day, the 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds that used to get out of the auctions and the FEI young horse, they were marred. They were already marred. And I remember talking to the leading German guy, and he was appalled when he came to America to see the frames that America was putting on 4-year-old FEI horses. Appalled.
Hmm.
He was absolutely parallel to what Mr. Oliveira said about leave the noses out and let the horses round up. And so it's the speed of needing to get there. It's the fact that they put 6-year-olds into the small tour now. The fact that people will say to me, do you happen to have an Iberian that can do a Prix Saint-Georges that's 6? I'm like, no, go away.
Wow.
And then I said, but you keep saying I'm old fashioned. So why are you asking me? It's not
Oh,
going to happen on my watch.
right,
Right.
right.
So I think that's the general malaise. Are all of them badly trained? No. I think that's a gross generalization. And is the act of competing young horses destructive? Not necessarily. I've seen equal amounts of destruction through people who waft around abandoning the horse between the aids in the name of lightness. So, in fact, I've seen worse destruction because chiropractically it's harder on the horse than being wedged.
Yeah.
In fact, the old head of Saumur said that to me years ago, and he was absolutely right. So, I think that's something you have to be very careful about. Basically, nobody gets up in the morning saying, "Oh, I hope I'm going to wreck this horse by jamming its neck and overriding it."
Right.
I haven't really come across many people, and the ones that do are self-admitted, very venal, need to make money. But it's the American system that then says, let's waste it, and then it's a filter down system, which is even scarier. That say you bought the schoolmaster that brings your uneducated child up to Grand Prix, which that makes my hair cringe in many levels. And then the child grows out of it. It's not fancy enough. You send it down to the person who wants to ride it Saint-Georges, who's middle-aged or stiff or whatever. And then that person retires it by giving it to a young rider that's going to rape it out of a test. And the test is going to come first. That's scandalous. That's scandalous. It's such a lack of respect for the educated horse that worries me more than what's happening to the young horses. Young horses have a capacity to recover because they're in a state of panic usually when they're ridden like that. They're in a state of panic. They're gesticulating movements. They're under spotlights. There's speakers they're not really prepared for and someone that's overriding them. And they're just like, noise.
Yeah.
You can recover them fairly well by putting them in a quiet place and saying, okay, that was a big mistake. Let's start with lesson number 1 and go from there. I think they recover better than I think we give them credit for. Physically, it's harder because they've had bad extended trots and flying changes ripped out of them before they've even learnt to bend through to the leg. And so automatically they've become locked behind in the pole. Their SI joint has become locked. And so, yeah, there's a lot of techniques to undo that. And wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to do that with these spectacular horses? And they are spectacular, undeniable. But they're spectacularly unrideable. And I just had this conversation not so long ago with a top breeder. And I'm like, the rideability factor has gone down. They're not, and the talent of the riders is about showing off the horse. It's not about helping the horse bend and stay under control. And the breeder was the first one to say, yes. And in the 80s, the old Trakehner breeder, who's the best breeder of Trakehner, said the same thing to me back then, and he was 82. So I don't think that's changed. I think it's just that the money has become outrageously huge, and that rarefied stratosphere has actually become thinner. There isn't as much money as we think at the highest echelon of international competition. And so it's very much a dog eat dog. And the national level is what's worrisome because the trainers grandstanded in America against doing rider tests. That at every level you'd have to be judged on your riding and not on the horse's capacity or training. And it was the American trainers that went to the powers that be and said, if you put that, we'll boycott every show because it cuts into our replacement costs, meaning the money they make when they replace the horse that has been emptied.
Oh.
And I find that repulsive, that there is a repulsive waste of horse. And it's like tossing away your, endless plastic. It's the same carelessness towards the planet, carelessness towards a resource. And I say that putting myself in the show person's mentality, that it's a resource to do X show at X level, right? So this isn't me talking, it's me trying to be in their world.
Right.
If you distance yourself against the emotions of the horse, you don't recognize the panic. Most of those riders on the young horses don't recognize that state of, this is just too much at me. And so that's a level of education that has to come back. Can classical dressage bring that back? I think we dropped the ball. I think we didn't replace our gene pool of riders fast enough, and we didn't really honor the teachers enough. The academies went through the same thing as the show riders. They wanted to be the head rider, the person, the name that could out piaffe everybody else, that could outdo someone. And so that level of knowledge, I don't think is available. And if it is, I think it's better served making a dent in teachers that can then bring on the next Nuno Oliveira. I don't think we're really there to clean up the Augean stables of what's being created in the name of international competition. That's their own world.
Yeah.
I've told them several times on both sides of the Atlantic, they need to make a division. They need to make a compulsory classical form division, and then they need to make a free-fall entertainment where you can do whatever you want with your training technique and crazy legs here and saddle seat hands and whatever you want. And because it's not going to last. It's piling up. The horses cannot manage and the riders cannot manage anymore. It's become an extreme sport. And does that worry me? It used to, and I tried to say my piece, and I was told that I was naive, that I was old-fashioned, that all this, and so I made a noise like a hoop, and I rolled away. You know?
Yeah.
But I don't think you can put classical form in that world right now. They don't want it.
They don't want it. Right.
And that's not a battle that's even like a windmill to tilt at. That's just that's a war zone.
Yeah. I did a podcast several years ago now, and I don't recall exactly who I was interviewing at the moment, but I remember she made a comment, something to the tune of, "But that's not my dressage." You know, as if talking about there just being that's just a complete division that's not the same thing.
Well, and I think the old stylists, particularly the old German stylists, are just flabbergasted at where it's gone. They lost control of the situation the minute that they didn't come out on the roller and the non-roller. I mean, Philippe Gall and I had the conversation about that. Both sides of the Atlantic, we really spoke out. And the denial is unbelievable, and the cover-up for each other is unbelievable. But the minute, to me, there's 1,001 different flexions that are less painful for the horse and more beneficial long-term in correct form. So, and 3 times I asked the people who invented it to justify it chiropractically, and they ducked 3 times. So I don't have much respect for that.
Yeah.
If you can't dialogue, and Philippe said the same thing. He argued around in circles, and then they stopped inviting him to the conferences. You know, and it's a compliment when that world puts you aside.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
Right.
I like
Do you think
being
that
too
that comes
controversial.
from the lack of rideability that you were mentioning with the horses, the way that they're being bred to be so extravagant, but they're
You,
less
you mean
rideable?
the roll cur comes
Hmm.
from that?
Yeah.
Oh, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's the fact that they don't bother to break in the young horses to get back the horses to the leg first. They don't tame the horse to the leg and supple it.
Yeah.
And that's where collection comes from.
Yeah.
Collection. Oliveira said to me years ago, a, a good rider has naturally good hands. A great trainer has an educated leg.
Mm.
And it's true. And
Mm.
so this flapping leg or the leg coming off and boxing,
Mm.
those are all worse to me than the roll curve. And the non-roll curve where they keep the pole and they pull the nose halfway to the neck and the nuchal ligaments right
Hmm.
to the attach of the long back muscle become flat. And so when you change the bend, the mane pops.
Yep.
And I'm told the judges will sort of not go past the 6 now when they see it, the good judges, because they've
Oh,
recognized the problem.
yeah.
But nobody's coming out and saying, don't do that. So I think that was the problem with the fact that nobody said, just don't do the roll curve.
Yeah. Just don't do it.
Then they said okay to having it in the FEI competitions in the warm up. That's when the pollution set in completely for me.
Mm.
There were other things that were equally horrible. There were razor blades, serrated edges, curbs in my day, and that you just say, what on earth is going through your brain that in the name of lifting horses' tootsies in odd ways justify that? It's sort of like, and then you call it dance. I'm like, what?
Mm.
So you're going to equate Baryshnikov to going into a bar, a saloon, and going up to someone and shooting underneath his feet. And when his feet do this, you're going to say that's Baryshnikov.
Right.
Okay. But if you really believe that, I don't have to talk to you.
Right.
We're done.
Right. Right. And there wouldn't be anything to be said.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of leads us into another question on here that came as well. The question is, can you ask Bettina about working young horses under 3 with groundwork, and when is the best time to start working with them, and for what length of time?
Well, it again depends what your discipline is and what you intend to do with it. If you're developing a dressage horse, it's very hard to do any work until the growth plates are stable and the knees are shut. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on the maturity of the individual breed. Mm-hmm. Basically, framing, leading, teaching the horse to lead in an educated fashion with the same posture that you would do in hand. I will walk them on the lunge. I will do a little bit of hill work, but I don't really do anything with the horses until they're 3.5. So
okay, yeah.
I don't really have that much to say. I don't. Oliveira didn't even touch them until they were 4. So it's again, our horses have to last. We ask them a lot of work in their hocks and backs because self-carriage costs and lightness costs. So we don't. There's no tradition beyond starting them up with a lunge line and then working some of the in hand. I tended to do much more of that to prep the horses for Oliveira than he did. He tended to put them in the rig and get their top line under control. So I think all of those things, light cavaletti work when they're 3.5 is good.
Okay.
I particularly like doing circles around a cavaletti and then going over it. And then I alternate a lot, lunging and work in hand. in the same session. I don't sit there didactically saying work in hand one day, lunge the other. I change surface too a lot. And the French word is passe-partout. I like my horse's feet to go through everything. I like them to be able to go and slosh through puddles and that sort of thing.
Great. Good. Perfect. All right. And now some wrap-up questions that I'll have here. If there was one specific thing that you could recommend for riders to focus on as a primary means of improving their horsemanship or their dressage, their riding in general, what would that be?
Control over their body and self-awareness on the body. That's the single biggest bugaboo as you go up the level of sensitivity, is that coordination. Particularly in the groundwork, few people warm up their own bodies. I just did a series for the French Link-U Perfect, and it's just interesting to me how little responsibility we take on our own formation. After my rehab, I had to do a lot of tango for my leg to come back. I had to do a lot of strange pool aerobics with the pressure of the water. I've never been lazy about that, and I'm always amazed at how unaware riders are that as you get higher and higher up, and you have to be within millimeters of precision and speed. You really have to know your body. So that to me would be step number one. To be a success in dressage is also to understand the biomechanics that you're trying to aim for. A lot of people read theory and talk about words, lightness, that sort of thing, throughness, but they don't use their eyes and see if they're actually achieving it. So also be honest. Be honest. Look at your shadow if you don't have a mirror. Get a video. Get a friend to take a series of pictures, and that will sort things out really quick without a motor drive. And look, I have a basement full of pictures of training sessions, not just videos, taken in quick fire, but not motor drive, because it shows me when I'm out of balance and when my body is not under control, when I'm out of balance. And I can't help the horse if I'm not in control of my body when the horse is falling out of balance.
Sure. Yeah, great. Let's see. What is your present personal definition of horsemanship?
Awareness of both your knowledge and your lack of knowledge as you look at the horse you're most familiar with.
I like that. If you had, I'm just totally pulling this one out, not off the list. If you had I've asked this before and I didn't have it on the list, but if you had a giant billboard for the whole world to see, what would be the message you'd put on it?
Go away. I assume you're talking about related to horses.
Oh, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be. I was almost expecting an immediate, like, live long and prosper or something.
Well, I think be aware and be bold with it.
I love that. And just a final question here. If folks are looking to find more information on you and what you're doing and how to learn from you and from what you've created, how can they find that?
It's a bit too late for me. I'm at the end of my career and life cycle, but I have students and I'm always willing to share that. And I do still virtuals, and maybe I'll go back to a clinic here and there, but it's mostly because of my situation, it's mostly going to have to wait and see. But I would encourage them to just tell me their geographic location, first of all, and then ask really who can help them. And a lot of it is, I always say, provide me with pictures, with a bit of video, with you, and tell me a little bit about your character, so that then I can custom refer you to someone, or one or two people that have that option. But for me, because of my time limit, I now really am only working with people who have already had their feet firmly on the path a certain amount. I just, I don't have enough energy anymore, and I don't think I'll have enough time. But that said, I'm always open to answering questions and doing virtual consults and helping anybody, so that they can get my email off of the internet, and they can also contact Apaha if that keeps going. If I have the energy next season to do another, then those applications can be looked at.
Perfect.
And you know, I do have a few deputy dogs. So if I can't do it, what I do is I consult behind them or with them.
Great. All right. Well, Bettina, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. And so
you keep educating yourself. And I'm glad that you're going to Europe, and you keep walking through my door, and keep educating yourself, so that when people call me, I can refer.
There we go.
That's all of you guys that are out there doing such a great job as clinicians. I'm so proud of you all, because I really worked hard in my clinic skills. 43 years of clinics, and I loved it. And it really warms my heart that you guys are out there stomping the ground and sacrificing your training time. And I'm always telling the clients, be nice to the teachers, because that they are sacrificing their learning time to help you.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what we'll have to do. Maybe you're going to be organizing a bunch of people, and I could be there either in person or virtually, and a bunch of teachers, so that we can have a private teaching clinic. That might be a fun Apaha thing to do.
I think
I still haven't forgotten the Boucher one. I think that's going to be something that will have to happen around this area, but we're working on it.
Yeah, great.
And so, all right, my friend, get some rest, because I know you're in the middle of a clinic, and thank you for this time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bettina. I look forward to chatting with you again very soon.
And thank all of your readership or podcastship for attending.
Yes, absolutely.
Take care.
Thank you.
Ride well. Bye now.
Thank you. And gang, I want to thank you so much for tuning in for episode number 56 of Talking About Horses. I really appreciate you giving Bettina and I your ear for this time. Please remember that if you've missed any of this, you can access the full broadcast again through Facebook, YouTube, or by streaming from iTunes. Through whatever platform you're listening, please be sure to give us a rating, a comment, a review, and a share. Thank you so much, gang.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Talking About Horses with Patrick King. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave a review and subscribe. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit pkhorsemanship.com. We'll catch you next time.